Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lisa Redamozo with NEC, and today we are kicking off our season of APR webinars for you all. And we're starting off with student support services because it typically is the first one due, but this year we have a little bit of surprise, I think, Lourdes. With me today is my dear friend Lourdes Maria Zavala, a sister from another mister, I like to say. I've known her forever, and I'm so excited and proud that she works with us, and she's a wealth of knowledge, and she's going to take us through the majority of this webinar, unpacking the APR for SSS. I was just letting folks know ahead of time that, the documents that we have are not the official Department of Ed documents. They're the instructions and the format for the 23-24 APR that Lourdes has gone in and edited as needed to update the years. So I've been using those, Lourdes, and as I've been working with my clients. On your screen, you should see our website. And if you go a little further down to our shop, you'll see that we're offering some upward bound technical assistance services as well. So hopefully you can see that. I'm not going to mess with that, but I'm going to turn over to Lourdes just to let you know that is an allowable cost. If you need additional information or assistance working on that, we're also very proud to have focusing on Veterans Upward Bound. APR is Miss Mary Meeks. That one, Lourdes, is a tough one for me. I struggle. I can't. I have to go with Mary to do that one. All the other ones, I'm pretty comfortable with and have been helping people for over 30 years working on that. And I'm trying to lure this over to help us with the APR technical assistance as well. But you can check that out later. Donna is going to be putting things with NEC here, items in the chat for you, links, and also a reminder that we'd love for you to put your questions in the Q&A so I can answer and also save some for Lourdes if I get stuck on any of them. And the whole idea is to provide you with a spreadsheet of questions and answers. You can also ask things anonymously if you'd like to. If I don't have the answer, or sometimes a question begs another question, I'll ask you to email us directly so we can give you the answer that you need. I hope to have that ready in a couple of days. The recording to this session should be ready by tomorrow. Will be posted on our YouTube channel along with last year's recording, and you will have access to the Google Drive with the documents. And Lourdes is going to take us through a couple of slide decks that she is also going to provide me so I can upload for you at a later date. But please, y'all, we'll gently remind you to keep your Q&As in the Q&A, your questions in the Q&A versus the chat. And so I'm going to turn it over right now to Lourdes. I'm going to stop sharing, Lourdes. And thank you again for joining us. I couldn't do this without you because with your experience, years in TRIO and your knowledge of the APR, Lourdes does this for other associations, including for COE. So she's the best of the best. So I'm so happy that she is joining us for this. And I'll start looking at the Q&A, and I'll raise my hand when something comes up that is maybe, what you're covering at the time. Okay.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lisa. Thank you so much for Donna and Leah for allowing me to join you with this SSS APR. I'm always excited to do the APRs. I'm just so geeky about the data, y'all. So for me, it's that opportunity for us to always jump into SSS to tell that story and that narrative about all of that wonderful work that we've done with our students. And so I love being a part of this. So thank you again for the invitation. Something that is always really important about, my experience in working with the annual performance reports is about SSS, because, as Lisa mentioned just a little bit ago, SSS has been like the first APR that kind of like how we're all doing it today. I've been in TRIO for 39 years, and over those 39 years, we started looking at first of what is SSS going to do, because they kind of set that pattern for this is what's going to happen with all of the rest of the annual performance reports. So I've always been, happy to always look at SSS first and say like, hey, what are they going to do? Because I'm certain that in the next APR that comes down the line for Upward Bound, for McNair, for Veterans Upward Bound, or Upward Bound Math Science is going to be something that was developed within student support services. So I always stay on top of that, what's happening. I've been working, as I mentioned, for 39 years with all of the TRIO programs, most specifically Upward Bound Talent Search and EOC. But I've had the opportunity to work and assist clients and individuals with the APR submissions for SSS, doing some compliance and helping with APRs on regulations for what should be reporting and everything APR. So I'm again happy that I'll be able to help you all with my experience to help you get prepared for the APR. So thanks again for this invitation and allowing me to do this. As we think about the annual performance report and kind of where we're at, I thought it'd be important to, before we start looking at those instructions and start looking at the field list, that we look at just a few major topics about the APR. Well, we know that this is the last year of the 24-25 is the last year of the grant cycle. And so there's not going to be any prior experience points that are going to be awarded. However, we will see a PE report in this standardized report that we will see as one of the products, one of those outputs that we get from the APR submission process. But we will not be technically earning any prior experience points. The other thing that's important to note is that this year, the 24-25, since it's the last year of the grant cycle, when it's going to be our last opportunity to respond to the competitive preference priorities. Many of you have all now moved past those because now you're in the new grant cycle in 25-26, at least the majority of you all, and you have all now begun implementing your new competitive preference priorities. However, we still need to respond to those in the 24-25 annual performance report from the last grant cycle. So not a whole lot of changes. In most cases, you'll all be able to use your narrative that you provided last year in the 23-24 APR and just edit it for content, and then just go out there and repost it for the 24-25 APR. It's important to note that in this APR in section 2, we're going to continue to report on students that were served in the 24-25 reporting period. So that means we'll include reporting on any new, any continuing, and any new summer participants. We'll also include some information on prior year participants, and most specifically those prior year participants that were enrolled at your grantee institutions in 24-25 and not receiving SSS services, and including those prior year participants that are no longer enrolled. For SSS four-year institutions, it's going to be important that we continue to report on those students who were first served in 2019-20. For those of you who are familiar with the record structure, you know that they're often referring to those as student cohort year 21. Anything prior to this student cohort year 21, you can either drop from your record structure or that file, that Excel file that we will upload to the department's web tool, or we will look at it carefully in the event that we find prior year participants that we've worked with that might be identified as out of range cohorts to include back in our APR file. Okay? So we'll want to definitely look at those, and we'll talk about those out of range cohorts a little bit later in this presentation. For two-year institutions, it'll be important that you include any prior year participants that were first served in 21-22. This group of students, of course, refers to student cohort year 23. And any prior year participants prior to that cohort will be removed from your record structure. Excuse me, and you will not have to report on them. Unless, of course, you come to the circumstance of out of range cohorts. And again, that is a conversation we will have. It's important also to note that for the 24-25 annual performance report, that as soon as we hear from our program specialists, as soon as we hear from the Department of Ed, as soon as we see anything posted in the trio.ed.gov website or on the TRIO's homepage regarding when the APR portal will go live, that you immediately log in and that you download the Excel file, of your 23-24 students that you must report on in 24-25. It will also be important that if you are a new director, or if this is the first time that you are submitting the annual performance report, that you ensure that you have the necessary credentials to log in, and that your certifying official at your institution, if they are new, that they also have those permissions for you to be able to log in to the login.gov in order to submit and certify your annual performance report. So don't wait. Don't wait until it's too late or when they say that the website will go down, because unfortunately it will take a couple of weeks, and especially given the current environment with the shutdown, that it may take even longer for individuals, for the department to approve any of the directors or approve any certifying officials who will need to have access to that website. So do this. Log in promptly once the APR website goes live. If we think about the annual performance report, because we're going to look at the form, we're going to look at the structure, but it's always important to note that what are we responding to? Why are we going to submit an Excel file? And why are we going to ensure that we have correct responses to some of our fields? And so I think it was important for us, especially for those of us who are new, this is the first time we're submitting, or if you're continuing individual that's going to submit, it's just kind of that reminder to, oh yeah, those are those fields that, even though I'm not earning prior experience points, which of those fields of data and or objectives I'm responding to. So in this particular slide, you'll see that I've identified the standardized objectives, because again, we will in the 24-25 get a standardized objectives report within our PDF, and it will still indicate whether we met particular goals and objectives. We're still required to do that. We just won't be earning prior experience points either. This slide does show you how many points are earned for any year when prior experience points are earned. Okay. Our first objective that we're going to be responding to is the persistence rate. Remember, those fields of data have a couple of critical fields, most specifically the participant field and a current persists field, that is going to help us determine whether the participants that we worked with, those who were served in 24-25, and whether they persisted from one academic to the next academic year, and or whether they graduated and or transferred. So we'll be looking to respond to this first particular objective. Our second objective is good academic standing. The two critical fields here are the Part CD field and the academic standing field. Remember, for this particular field, we're trying to look at those students who were enrolled, who were served by the project in 24-25, and whether they are in good academic standing. So our responses to these particular fields are particularly important to meeting this objective. The next objective, and let's go ahead and take a look at for four-year grantees. So for our four-year institutions, we're looking at the number of participants that are served and whether they graduate within 6 years. So we're going to be looking at students who are within a defined student cohort year. And these particular groups of individuals begin forming what we call a denominator. And so we're looking for who are the students who graduated who started the program within a particular cohort year, and whether they now, 6 years later, as reported in the degree CD field, have actually earned a bachelor's or equivalent to a bachelor's degree within 6 years. So we'll be responding to this particular two fields of data to determine whether we met this 4-year graduation rate. For our 2-year grantees, we're looking at, two parts of this particular objective. The first part with respect to graduation, and the second part of it with respect to transfer. We know that for our 2-year institutions, we're looking at those students who were within a particular cohort. In this case, we're looking at the students who entered our cohort in 2023. or that we've identified as student cohort yet 23, and determining whether those individuals have earned an associate's or a certificate within 4 years. And if we meet that particular objective, we'll earn, we'll have met the objective for at least the first part of this objective. Our second part of that objective for our 2-year institutions is whether students transferred, whether students that were in the same particular cohort, identified as cohort 23, and whether they transferred to another institution, or meaning from a 2-year to a 4-year institution. Oftentimes we have different responses, like a value 11 or a value number 12, to indicate that the students have transferred. So we're looking for specific responses to some of these critical fields of data to help us again assess whether we met particular goals and objectives. We also know that we need to remain in compliance. So as we begin preparing this Excel file that we'll submit in the APR website, that we're ensuring that we're in compliance with respect to meeting our numbers and the number funded to serve, and most specifically, the eligibility criteria. Are we in compliance with respect to the number of students who are both first generation low income and or are disabled students? And then, of course, meeting the 1/3 criteria with the number of students who are disabled and whether they are low income. So we are still going to be held accountable for reaching our numbers and in meeting our objectives. We just will not be earning prior experience points in the 24-25 annual performance report. Now, the question again always comes up is that when is that APR going to be due? Well, we know we're currently experiencing a government shutdown. And if you happen to go to the TRIO department homepage, you're going to see a message that indicates that the site is not being updated because of the government shutdown. However, we know that the annual performance report is handled by a contractor. And so we use the trio.ed.gov website to submit our annual performance report. And if you happen to go out to the trio.ed.gov website, handled again by the contractors that are hired by the Department of Education to capture our information for the annual performance reports, you'll see that they have updated the annual performance reports dates. Now, whether these might change, of course, is something that may happen when the Department of Education and after the shutdown and they get back to updating this website, we may see some tentative dates. However, this is currently the best guidance that we have and that we can begin using as a timeline for submitting our annual performance report. You'll notice, as Lisa mentioned earlier, that Talent Search and EOC have already posted that they'll be opening later this month in October the 29th, and that their annual performance reports will be due by December 4th. That's when the APR website goes down. Of course, we're not going to wait till that end date. We're going to try to submit prior to that so that we can ensure that our annual performance reports are submitted in a timely fashion. Lisa, personally, I think that the Talent Search and the EOC have moved forward because, Talent Search and EOC are slated to submit grants this year. And so the department has to ensure a process similar to what they did for SSS last year. They moved the SSS APR forward in order to allow for the competition to happen and for prior experience points to be assessed. So I wasn't quite surprised seeing that Talent Search and EOC are first. And that's, I think, something that we had anticipated. So I think that's a good move. But what we can see from this is that it's now moved SSS to being opening up in January. But again, we'll continue to monitor that as we, start seeing the government opening back up and that department's homepage, the TRIO homepage, getting updated as needed. So folks, keep an eye on this site and of course the department's homepage.
Lourdes, I have a couple of questions that might be timely here. You let me know if you want to cover it later. But what
Okay.
about I'm guessing the answer, well, I'm not sure. Are the PE points different from those with a banked year? For example, a banked year, 24,
Mhm,
25 year four that has been awarded for 25 through the 30 competition. Will prior
mhm.
experience points be calculated for 2024, 2025 APR? It doesn't
No,
seem like they would
no.
be used for
Mm-mm.
anything.
No, no, they will not because, we all competed at the same time, whether you had that bank year or not. And so the same years were assessed for everyone. So everybody will still get the report. It'll still show prior experience points on it. However, no one is being awarded. Everybody to be selected, they looked at the same years for everyone. Okay.
Right. So it's no different.
It's no different. And also, I think what's also important about that is that even though you had the additional banked year, you were still starting your new objectives now. I mean,
That's very important. That's very
that's
important. Some people
very
might
important. So
know.
don't think I have to start my new objectives next year. You were beginning them that now in 25, 26, so that everybody is on the same cycle with respect to the objectives that are being analyzed for prior experience points. Okay,
Thank you. Thank you for
so
that clarification.
yes. So one thing that will also be important about the 25-26 year for all TRIO SSS programs is that 25-26 is the first year of the new grant cycle. So when you do get ready to submit the 25-26 APR next year, it will also be a standardized report because it's not going to be one of those 3 middle years when you were evaluated for prior experience. Remember, they use that very first year of the grant cycle to kind of give you an opportunity to get established with these new objectives. And especially if you're a new project in 25-26, to get set up and begin functioning as a new program in the new grant cycle. Okay. Um, so if we look at this tentative dates that have been published at trio.ed.gov by the contractor, we see that the APR website will go live again January 7th, 2026. However, knowing that that date is in January, it doesn't mean that we should wait until December to start capturing the information we need. Most of the information that we need for the annual performance report for 24-25 is already available. And so I would start working on it, begin finalizing your APR, and then just waiting, for the APR website to go live and start focusing more your energies on the 25-26 program year. So don't wait again until that APR website goes live to start thinking about it again, because again, most of the data and actually all of the data that you need is already available to submit the 24-25 APR. Okay. Now, when the APR website does go live, right now, it's not live, even though account search says open and open, it's really not yet technically open until the 29th. But when the APR does go live, so like for SSS on January 7th, 2026, you will click on login. This will take you to the login.gov website where you have to log in using your credentials for login.gov to be able to access the APR website and the APR web portal. Okay. So again, use the time now if you are a new director to set up your login.gov. If you have a new certifying official, ensure that they have a login.gov account. If you have a new data entry person who needs to access the APR website, they also will need a login.gov. So if anything you're waiting for right now is I would spend my time ensuring that everyone has the login.gov account. And the other thing that's going to be important is that, again, any individual that needs permission to the APR website needs to be approved. So again, do not wait until the closing time for the APR to ask for permissions for any individual that needs permission and or a login.gov account. When the APR website goes live, if you have a new certifying official, the director will be asked to indicate, is this your certifying official? And if it's not, then the director can say this is the new certifying official. But what that does is it sends a message to the contractor. The contractor then forwards the message to the Department of Education to say, does this person have the permission to certify this annual performance report submission? So it's not a given. There has to be approvals. So that's where you all can spend your time right now, especially if there's a change with respect to who is the director and or the certifying official. Okay? Because then once the APR website goes live, you'll be able to log in to download the Excel file that it will include the list of participants that you're required to report on. And you can continue working and updating your records and ensuring that everybody that you have on your Excel file that you've prepared and are ready for is also on that downloaded list. Okay. When you do log into the APR website, you will see 4 different tabs. The first tab is section 1, which includes information on the project. Section 2, where we will upload our files. And actually, it's also going to be the place where you can download last year's Excel file and also use it to upload an updated file, which will include everybody that's on the downloaded file, plus any new participants. And in the event that you have any out-of-range cohort students, you can include those as well. And then you will prepare your file using any data tool that you're currently using, whether you're using Student Access or Bloomin or Lakai or any homegrown Excel files or databases. Whatever you are using, you'll create your Excel file and that you will then click on section 2 and upload to the APR website. The other tabs, project standard objective is really an opportunity for you to review your percentages for your approved objectives and to ensure that this is what you're being assessed against, your approved objectives. And then the review and submit tab is where you will click on the run all the data analytics. Check my data for errors and ensure that I have met my objectives, identify who are my participants. And then if everything is okay, then in the review and submit process is where you will then certify that the APR is correct, and you will click on approve and submit the APR. Okay. We'll talk about that here in the next slide of what it is that you will download in that submission and certification. Okay. So at the conclusion of the APR in the web portal, you have an opportunity to click on review and submit. This is what that review and submit will look like. It will allow you to preview before submitting the APR so that you can ensure what you already knew because your data system said this is where you're at with respect to meeting goals and objectives. And so you will review that. If it looks good, then you can feel confident about moving forward with the APR submission process. You will click on where it says certify and you will click on approve. But one thing that you'll also want to make sure that you do is that you click on download data. The download data will take all of the information that was reviewed, that was uploaded, reviewed, and if you made any corrections within the APR website, it will now have those corrections, plus any new participants that you uploaded to the APR website will now have a new case number. So this is your opportunity to get case numbers for those new participants. So make sure that you download the data and certify and click on approve. Once the director has done this process of certifying and approving, this will trigger a message to be sent to the certifying official to indicate that the director has approved and that they now also need to log in to trio.gov, click on login, log in to login.gov, which will route them back to the APR website. And then they can open up this review and submit process, click on certify, and click on approve. And that will complete the APR submission process. Now, in the prior annual performance reports, the certifying official had 5 days to certify. So it's going to be important for you to read the instructions when they do come out, because what we were told by the Department of Education a couple of years ago when they were going to implement this new APR submission and certification was that they were going to cut that down to 2 days, and then after 2 days that it had to be submitted immediately. So you want to make sure that the director and the certifying official are aware of what is going to be the new timeline with respect to how quickly they need to certify the APR. Okay, so especially, when we're looking at dates, and if those dates happen to change, hopefully there's not a holiday in there, and that they're able to quickly log in and certify so that you can get this APR submitted. Okay. So those are just a few of the tips, things that I thought would be important for us to look at before we begin looking at the APR structure and, those sections, section 1, the project information, and the record structure, because that's where we will spend the majority of the rest of this webinar. Okay. Lisa, are there, I didn't open the questions, but are there other questions that we need to?
I think we're okay. I think someone asked where can they get last year's Excel
Mhm,
student list, and Donna's also
mhm,
wanting to know, or we have a poll going on if this is the first time you've done your APR and what database do you
mhm.
utilize. But if you could address the
Wonderful.
Excel file where they would get that
Yeah.
would be great.
Yeah, great question, everyone. Because I get the question all the time, where do I get that Excel file? Okay. When the APR website goes live, that's when it's going to be your first opportunity to download that file. But again, you have to have permissions to get into that APR website to download the file. You will click on, you will click on the, here, let me go back to the slide here. Okay. You will click on section 2, and when you click on section 2, there'll be a link. There will be actually a couple of links. One of the links will be to download the data, and that's the option that you want to choose, to download the data. Um, in most cases, what the department has done is that they will take last year's file and they will have removed any individuals that have already been assessed, from prior cohorts that you no longer have to report on. And they will leave on that Excel file individuals that you were still required to report on. So that's your best option if you do not have access to it, because I get that some directors have left. You're a new director and you're responsible for submitting the APR now. That's going to be your first option to download that file. If you're continuing director, then the majority of you will have downloaded the APR last year and stored not only the Excel file, but also the PDF to show the prior experience points that were awarded. But you'll also have that Excel file. If you use that second option of using last year's APR file, you'll essentially have to remove any prior participants that were assessed in last year's cohort. And then anybody remaining after that will be individuals that you're most likely required to report on. However, the best option again is to downloading that file when the APR website goes live. Because oftentimes, for example, if you take the option where you use last year's file, there may be individuals that for some reason they got left on your Excel file and you had to report on them. Even though you're wondering, like, why is that person still on this report and why am I still reporting on them? Well, you have to report on them if they're in that download file. The other reason is because you may have a participant that you still need to upload because they are what we consider, again, an out-of-range cohort. Now, let's go ahead and think about that out-of-range cohort individual. The out-of-range cohort individual is somebody who was already assessed because their cohort year was assessed for degree attainment. However, we might have an individual, for example, who belonged to a particular cohort, but left our grantee institution and was no longer being served. Their cohort was already assessed for degree attainment, and they kind of just dropped off our records. Now, in 24-25, maybe one of those students came back. And if that student came back and received services in 24-25, then you definitely want to count that student in the individuals of numbers served, and you want to get credit for having served those individuals. And so for that out of range, out of cohort individual, you have to make a decision. When was the last time that I served that individual? If that individual was served prior to this last cohort, then you can bring that student in to your program in 24-25 as a new participant. You would remove their case number that was previously reported, and you would identify them as a new participant for the 24-25 cohort. And that student now is going to be tracked for another 6 or 4 years, degree attainment, based on the type of institution you are. For those students that were served in this last grant cycle, and but their cohort had already been evaluated, if you serve them in 24-25, because they were served in this last grant cycle, you can count them in your numbers. However, for those students, because they were served in the last cohort, in this last, grant cycle, you would have to change their cohort year to a 99 value, meaning they might count for your number funded to serve. They might help you for a couple of the objectives, but they will never be assessed for degree attainment. Okay, so that's the reason why we might have to report on an individual who is an out of range cohort. And yes, we will want to report on them if they were served in 24-25, and if we definitely need them to meet our number funded to serve. Okay? So those are some reasons why we might, have to include some of those individuals from those cohorts.
But Lourdes, just want to remind you, we have less than an hour to go through.
Okay, great. Okay, so thank you all for responding to the questions about whether this is your first APR and the program that you're currently using to capture your information. So, some things that we've, typically seen is that Bloomin' and Student Access, will provide you the information. And one thing that you want to ensure of, and that I mentioned again in this last slide, is that this Excel file that you download, you'll want to work carefully with your vendors if you made any changes online, because the final data, the document that you download, this Excel file, in for Bloomin' and for Student Access, you'll want to replace if you made any changes online. If there were just a few and you want to make them on your own in your database, then that's fine, okay? For those of you who are new, please ask lots of questions if this is the first time. I think the one thing that can be really intimidating is when you look at those 67 fields a day, the fifth, I'm sorry, I was thinking about upward bound earlier. When we're responding to those 37 fields of data, SSS are like, what? 67 fields, 37 fields of data, and trying to look at the various responses that you have. Okay, so take it in stride. Okay, we're going to go ahead and let's go ahead and take a look at those fields of data. What does that really look like with this particular response? Okay, and let me go ahead and zoom in here a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. And does that look okay? Can folks see this? Okay. When we submit the annual performance
See
report,
the PowerPoint slide, but maybe that's me. Can y'all see the document?
look at
I'm still seeing the PowerPoint slide.
Yeah.
Okay, let me
Stop,
go ahead and I'm gonna,
learn from me. Stop sharing and then share
let
again,
me,
because
yeah,
that's what
let me
happened
share that again.
today.
Okay, let's go share again. Share, here, go. There we go.
I think Zoom did something crazy. That's my excuse because it wasn't
Oh,
difficult before. Okay. I
great,
think,
there we go.
and if you
There we
could
go.
a little bit bigger, just a
Mm,
little bit, you know how maybe it's just my
yeah.
eyes. Thank you, Lord.
Great, great. Okay. So as we mentioned, we're providing for you, the 23-24 instructions. We don't anticipate that there will be any changes. There's been no changes in the Higher Education Act before this APR will be published. So we don't anticipate any major changes. Okay. We're still responding to the same objectives. So let's go ahead and use these for now. But again, you will want to download the instructions once the APR website goes live. Okay, so we mentioned that section 1, that you will be, a lot of this will be pre-populated. You're identifying who is the project that is submitting this annual performance report. So again, because the login credentials are tied to the director and the project, a lot of it is pre-populated. The only part of it that is not pre-populated is if you have a data entry person, you'll need to fill that out. When you get to the APR website, it is a form. So this document looks like a paper form, but you will actually have a form at the website. You will identify, sorry, I need to use this so that I can scroll down, not. You'll fill in the information about the project. You'll respond to some information regarding the GPA scale. And again, the information about your project will be filled in. And you'll have to answer some questions regarding the project characteristics. So you'll need to enter, does your program have a summer bridge program? And if so, how many students participated? Um, did your project provide any grant aid? And if so, how much money did you have that you spent in grant aid? And then also, was there a requirement to provide matching funds? You'll also be asked whether you received any institutional or non-federal funds in managing your program. And so if you did, you'll also need to respond to about what was that particular dollar amount. You'll notice that in section 1, here's where we see the wording and regarding the certification of our program. I already showed you what that looked like in the slide presentation. That it's a form where you will now certify, that on this date, I submitted the APR and it is readily verifiable. So what you're indicating here is that to the best of your knowledge, the information that you have, will help certify that you, if you've indicated, for example, that somebody graduated, that you have documentation that supports graduation, college enrollment and or transfer. So essentially you're certifying this and approving, and then also your certifying official is doing as well. So this is just kind of what's in that wording that you're certifying on that form that I showed you earlier. Okay. In prior years, we used to have to print this, sign it, get the certifying official to sign it, and then we would scan it and upload it back up to the APR website. But we are, again, no longer doing that. We're doing this all by providing a digital signature by the director and the certifying official. Okay. Section 1, Part 2 is now requesting some information about the required services. So here, you will use your databases to try to come up to the numbers of the number of participants that receive these required services. So use your databases, assess how many of those students actually received academic tutoring. These numbers for each of these required services should not exceed the number that was served. You'll notice that in the column on the far right, they are also asking you whether participants that were served in 24-25 and whether these participants were referred to another service provider. These numbers should not exceed the number that you served within the 24-25 reporting period. You're also just being asked to respond to how many were referrals. You are not being held responsible for did they go to that other service provider. Simply, did you refer them to another service? So again, address the number here of the services that your students received. And again, you'll notice at the top part of it, we're talking about required services. Okay. Again, when you provide those numbers, do not exceed the number funded to serve. So that also means that you are not going to count a participant more than once. Even if they went to academic tutoring, like maybe 20 or 30 times, you were only counting that participant as once. Okay. So again, here they're strictly requesting information on those required services. You'll also have an opportunity again to respond to the 24-25 competitive preference priorities. You'll notice that they're again asking you, they have an interest about how you implemented these priorities and asking you about the number of students that received this particular service or intervention. You'll notice they want you to be brief. I often will, type everything up in Word so I can do my word count and then copy and paste it here. Again, I recommended earlier that you can also take a look at what you responded to last year. Open up that PDF last year, copy and paste it, and then edit it in Word and then paste it back in here. These are not any, any things that the Department of Education is ties to any outcomes. They're just interested in finding out how you continue to implement and address those competitive preference priorities. Now we begin the participant structure list. And so we will spend a lot of time, the rest of the time here, just really looking carefully at those fields of data, those 37 fields of data that we're responding to in this Excel file for each participant. Remember, we're reporting on any student who was new, continuing, it was a reentry or called continuing students, and any summer admits. And we're reporting on any prior year participants, especially if they were still at our institution and or if they belong to particular cohorts that we're tracking for degree attainment. Okay? So as we think about this particular record structure, you want to be visualizing an Excel spreadsheet. The database column name will be every column header. There's really 38 fields because one of them, disability, has a part B to it. But every one of these Excel column headers should be identified as they are here. So PR, batch AY, case number, last name, first name. And then every row across your Excel spreadsheet will be a record for each student. Remember, we're telling the narrative for the student based on an Excel file with just numbers, okay? No narrative, just a response, okay? So if we think about this Excel spreadsheet, in the first column 1, everybody will have your PR number. Your PR number from the 24-25 annual performance and the last year's grant cycle. Don't use the new PR number that you have now. That's a new number for 25-26. You'll get an error. And so we want to eliminate, avoid getting errors on this. So I think that's a common error, folks. Put the new especially in this first year of the new grant cycle, they tend to put your new PR number rather than the old one. Remember, you're reporting to the last year of the last grant cycle, okay? So every record will have your PR number from last year. Every record will also have a batch year 24. All of our records will go into, when we upload to this APR website, they're going to go into a mainframe database that's going to say, here's all of the records from all across the US and all the nation of all SSS projects. They can pull out any one record and know, okay, this belongs to your institution for the 24 reporting period. Okay, that's how they create that Government Performance Results Act report to determine how all SSS projects are going. So you want to ensure that that information stays constant for every record in this Excel file. Beginning at field number 3, case number, every student on that Excel file that you download from the APR website will have their case number. Do not give them a new case number. You will upload an Excel file for new participants. Their case number will be blank. But remember, at the conclusion of the APR submission process, I mentioned that you will download an Excel file where those case numbers will be assigned. The next few fields of data, and we're going to go over quickly some of these, are really just to identify, again, those students. So when you look at field number 4, 5, 6, and 7, these are all now participant data. Their last name, their first name, their middle initial, and date of birth. These 4 fields of data cannot be changed. Once you have reported a participant record with their last name, first name, and date of birth, you cannot change that. You can update middle initial if you need to, but last name, first name, and date of birth, you cannot change. That has to stay the same, or you will get an error. The tool will actually think it's a new student. So you want to ensure that your records stay the same with respect to last name, first name, middle initial, and date of birth, not middle initial. And I'm so sorry, I keep wanting to hit next page, but the next few fields of data allow us to continue to capture information, demographic information regarding the participant. In field number 8, we have gender CD. Gender CD, we've highlighted 3 and 0 to indicate that there may be a change in the APR with respect to even most specifically number 3. They may keep 0 response or unknown, but we think they might eliminate option number 3. Okay. The next few fields of data allow us to respond to the student's race and ethnicity. In field number 9, you'll identify whether the student is identified as Hispanic, yes or no, or not, unknown or undisclosed. And then in the remaining fields, 10, 11, 12, and 13 and 14, you'll identify whether the student has on their application identified as being any one of these particular races. You want to ensure that in your own application processes that you're allowing the students to self-identify whether they are any one of these particular races. Something that is important to note about students that you identify as Hispanic, sometimes your APR databases or the web tool will indicate that you have an error if you indicate, for example, that the student is Hispanic, but that you do not in field number 13 indicate that they are white. So please note that that is oftentimes an error that you get. You can continue to submit your APR even though you're getting that error, but in most cases, you will be halted because it says, well, there's an error. If you identify a student as a Hispanic, you need to indicate whether they are one of the other races. Okay, so please look at your responses, most particularly for your Hispanic students. Okay. It's important to note that the next few fields of data all go hand in hand with respect to identifying a student's eligibility for SSS services. You'll notice that field 15A is asking whether the participant is both first generation low income and or low income only, first generation and or disabled. This is the field that the department is using again to assess whether you are meeting the 2/3 criteria. You'll also notice that in field 15B, that if you've identified in 15A that a participant is a value number 4 or 5 because they're disabled, then you need to ensure that in 15B, you also choose option number 1 to indicate that, yes, that student is disabled. Again, read carefully any definitions that apply that will come that are as part of those instructions. And Lisa has also made sure, and Donna and Leah have ensured that those instructions that we have edited along with these with this form is also in the Google Dropbox that you're using. Okay. So again, ensure that you're responding to appropriately to that students, because you want to make sure that any APR that you submit, that you are saying, I am in compliance, I met the number served, and I have met my compliance with regards to the 2/3 and 1/3 eligibility criteria. Field number 16 is a field that once you indicate this is the reason why the student was selected to be a participant in with respect to academic need, because we know in SSS we have to say the student had a demonstrated academic need for services. And so within this need CD field are some of the most common responses about a student's need for SSS program services. So use the information that responds to how you assess that student's need for being selected to participate in your program. The next few fields of data are also with respect to when the student was first brought into your program. When, in field number 17, did they first enroll at your institution? In field number 18, you're going to indicate when was that student first served by the project. Now, if you think about those two, we often in SSS bring in students into the program, prior, those new summer admits, they're going to be a new student in the fall. And so it is going to be okay to have their first service date be prior, in those circumstances, be prior to their first enrollment date. Because they're going to be intending to enroll as a first time, fall freshman in the fall. And that will begin maybe, late August or September. But we brought them in the summer. So we could have indicated a first service date in June, in July and August, before that first enroll date. Okay. I mention these things now because sometimes, depending on when we recruited students, the APR web tool in that review and submit process is going to evaluate your responses. And if it thinks that you are providing information that conflicts with another field, then you will see an error. An error message will be generated. You'll see it in the APR web tool that says, well, wait a minute. Remember this Excel file, you're telling me a narrative, a story about the student, but something just does not jive. You're not telling me something because these dates are not aligning with a student having enrolled and when they began participating. So a lot of these fields may provide sources for conflict. So you need to understand, again, that narrative. Okay. Field number 19 is asking the question of when you brought the student into your program, your SSS program, what was their entering grade level? You may need to use your own institution's evaluation of how you're counting maybe credits. But what is important to note that if you're bringing in, for example, freshmen, who might have done dual enrollment courses while they were in high school, that we're not considering dual enrollment as college entry. Okay, so don't think about those credits in terms of evaluating entry. At the end of the evaluation process, you will count those credits though for assessing their grade levels at the end of the reporting period. Okay, but for entry, do not consider any dual enrollment classes for determining their entering grade level. Okay, you'll notice that you have a couple of different options here to assess. I think what's also important about those varying grade levels is something that we know about our SSS programs, is that even though we bring our students into our programs for a particular cohort year, for example, the 24-25 cohort year, we can bring in students at varying grade levels. So some of our students might graduate in 2 years. Some of them might graduate in 4 years. For 4-year institutions, some of them might graduate in 6 years. But what's important about that is that we'll continue to report year after year, even if they graduated prior to the 4 or the 6 years. Because the web tool is using our information to not only respond to our objectives, but to respond to the Government Performance Results Act, meaning that report that they do on SSS projects to how often and how early do students graduate? Do they take 2 years to graduate from a 4-year institution, or 3 years, or 4 years? And so they're capturing that data based on information that we are providing to these field responses. Okay. Field number 20, and another field that we're looking at here carefully is looking at the student's enrollment status. They're looking at the student status for the 24-25 and asking the question about whether that student was enrolled full-time during the 24-25 reporting period. So they're looking at, fall, spring, and summer. Was that student enrolled and considered a full-time student based on the number of credits or classes that the students are enrolled in? So you'll choose the appropriate response based on their enrollment status. Field number 21, we identified earlier as being a critical field. It's a critical field because they're using it to assess how long it takes for students to earn a degree, whether it's a certificate or an associate's degree for a 2-year institution, or a 4-year or a 5 or 6-year, right, for our 4-year institutions. So they're looking at those particular cohorts, again, to determine how long it takes to earn a degree. It's important to note that when the APR instructions do come out, they'll add the new value. We've added it here, number 27, to refer to the 25-26 cohort. It's important that we have a 25-26 cohort because of the type of students that we're going to recruit in the 24-25 reporting period. Remember, our reporting period ends on August 31st of 2025, and we might have recruited students in the summer of 2025 where 25-26 is going to be their first year of college. So we want to ensure that in those cases, we give those students a cohort of 25-26 as being their first year of college cohort, so that we now will give those students an opportunity to have 6 years and our 4 years for our 2-year institutions to earn a credential. Okay, so, and make sure that when you look at those instructions that they have added this 27 cohort for the 25-26 reporting period. It's also important to note that this cohort, once you have identified a student as being in a cohort, meaning the year that you brought them in when you first served them in your program, that's what the student cohort year is the year that you first served them, that you do not change this cohort year. Okay. I mentioned the only circumstance where you would change this student cohort year, and that's for any individuals that we have talked about that are out of range cohorts. For an out of range cohort, again, that was served in 24-25 and was recently served in this last grant cycle, you will change their student cohort to 99. However, if it was, again, an out of range cohort who was served in a prior grant cycle, then you can bring them into your program in 24-25 as a new participant and assign them with a 26 cohort, meaning that they were first served in 24-25. Okay, but there are, again, those conditions that you must meet in order to be able to change this cohort year. Part CD, we also identified as being a critical field. It's a critical field because this is the field that the Department of Education uses to identify whether you met your number funded to serve. They count the number of students that you have identified as a 1, new participant, 2, continuing participant, and a number 8, a new summer participant that earned college credit, and a 9, a new summer participant that did not earn college credit. So if you add up the 1s, 2s, 8, and 9s in your Excel file, and often what I'll do is I'll take my Excel file, once I've exported it either from Blumen or from Student Access or my Lakai or whatever, I look at that Excel file that I'm going to upload to the APR website, and I use the filtering options. I go to Part CD and I do data filter, and I go to Part CD and I filter on how many records do I have, a 1, 2, an 8, or a 9. And down in the lower left-hand corner, it should show me the number that I was funded to serve. And if that number is less than my number funded to serve, then I know I met my numbers and somebody's missing off of my list. I might have miscoded them. So that's kind of a tip that I like to do, to look at that. I then also filter within a filter, because then I'll go back and I'll look at that eligibility CD to ensure that now am I in compliance. So again, look at your responses, test your data, take a look at that to ensure that, again, that you are in compliance with respect to numbers. And this participant CD field is critical to that. Now, it's important to note that in a little bit, we'll look at these varying options of 8 and 9s and how they impact our objectives. The next field, again, read carefully the instructions. They'll help you identify, who belongs in which group, is field number 23. Field number 23 is a field that is similar to the first enroll CD. They're asking you the question about the student's enrollment status at the end of the academic year. Now, field number 20 and field number 23 often go hand in hand, especially when you're talking about new participants, because they're talking about the same period for a new participant. So your response when you identify a participant as new, field number 20 should equal field number 23. When you read the instructions for this particular field, they also tell you don't edit first enroll CD number 20, but for new participants that you brought in during the summer program, you'll find that you do have to update some fields, even though the department has indicated don't update that field. Because we have to indicate, for example, a participant who was new in 23-24, that was a new summer admit, that we identified in the 23-24 APR, for example. If we said they were a new summer, coded them as either a value 8 or 9 in 23-24, then in 24-25, we have to indicate that they are a new participant. So for those students only, again, you reported them in 23-24 as an 8 or a 9, and they are a new participant continuing with you in 24-25, you must change their part CD to equal new or a 1 value. The reason that we have to do that, again, is because of the GEPRA report, the Government Performance Results Act. They are, again, using that data, and so they are trying to assess how many students were a new student within the 24-25 reporting that you identified as a new student, as a new freshman, to identify a denominator to assess, again, this particular group, to assess how long is it taking for them to graduate. Okay, so read carefully again those instructions, and they will delineate again that reason that you have to change their part CD to a 1. Okay. Field number 24 is the field that we talked a little bit about earlier. It allows us to respond to the academic standing. They're looking at students who you have coded as a new, a continuing, or a participant that you've identified as a new summer participant that was taking classes. They would have gotten a GPA because they were taking classes. And so any of those students, they're asking the question about, were they in good standing, to determine whether you met this particular objective. Now, I do want to mention something here that is also important about the objectives. with respect to this academic standing. In the cases where you have not served the number funded to serve, when they evaluate who is in the denominator, if you are under the number funded to serve, they will use the number funded to serve as the denominator and not the number you served. So if you are short in serving number of participants, then you're impacted by this particular objective because they're not going to consider who was served. They're going to consider who should have been served. Okay. And that could potentially impact the outcome of your objective. On the flip side of that objective, you will also be impacted if you overserve participants. So I know many of you all have awesome, wonderful tree of hearts and want to say, well, I could serve just a couple more participants because they really need our services. But when you overserve participants, it will also impact you because the number that you now have served becomes the denominator for assessing this objective. Okay, so just keep that in mind about how the number is served. It determines outcomes of objectives, especially in this particular case for academic standing. The next field is cumulative GPA. And so here you'll report on the GPA that your institution has provided for you. You'll notice that we begin seeing some responses, and even for a couple of these others, if a participant is a prior year participant that we're, that their cohort has already been assessed or they're no longer at the institution, we see that we have some options of saying it's not applicable. Option value number 9. It's not applicable because they're a prior year participant, no longer at the institution. So you can use some of these 9 values. We also see that here in cum GPA. The student, who is no longer enrolled, also for those new summer participants that didn't take classes in the summer, they won't have earned a GPA. And so you can use that 9.999 value. And then, of course, if it's unknown, you'll enter 7.77. The next few fields of data allow us to begin tracking the persistence for participants. So you'll notice that in field 26, they're asking you, what is the participant status of the student at the beginning of the year? So I like to look at this with respect to in the fall of 24, what was that student's grade level? And then consider my various responses here. And then in the next field, 27, I like to look at that as what was the student's status at the beginning of 25, 26. So I'm essentially reporting that progression of moving from one grade level to the next grade level. You'll also notice that because we're reporting on a wide range of students and participation levels, you'll see that, for example, in field number 26, we have an option number 15 to indicate that the student was a summer participant. So we're not really assessing that student progressing because, again, they were not here in the fall of 24. I didn't bring them into the program until the summer of 25. So I can use that summer response as needed. Field number 28 and 29 allow us to respond to a student who may have left our program. We need to indicate that they're no longer being served. And then in the reason, we need to indicate the reason that student is no longer at the institution. You'll notice that the last served date is if we've exited them prior to the 24-25, then the date would have been, prior to September 1 of 2024. And in most cases, we probably would have used a prior year code for Part CD. The either option number 3 or an option number 4 and say they're no longer here. And we would have indicated, a reason. You'll also notice that if you try to indicate that they're a new, continuing, or summer admit, if you have a last served date in there, it'll generate an error because you can't say they're currently served if they had a last serve date prior to September 1 of 2024. So that's another example of how these errors. So think about logically, how would I report that student in terms of how long and when they were in our program? So, you'll report that information. Field number 30 allows us to respond to whether the student has transferred. Did that student transfer because they transfer from a 2-year to a 4-year institution, particularly for our 2-year institutions where we have this transfer initiative, where the student can have transfer from a 2-year to a 4-year and will still count as having persisted because they transferred from a 2-year to a 4-year. The degree CD field allows us to respond to whether our participants have, whether our students have earned any credentials. Did they earn a certificate and that was less than 2 years, or did they earn a certificate that was at least 2 years and didn't transfer? For our 4-year institutions, did they earn a bachelor's degree? Again, the 4-year and option number 6, did they earn what's equivalent to a bachelor's degree because they were working on both a bachelor's and a master's degree? For participants that didn't earn any kind of degree, you'll notice we have an option number 9, to indicate that they didn't. Options 10, 11, and 12 are options that are really important for our 2-year SSS programs, because here we're trying to report on whether they earned an associate's degree. Number 10, that they earned the associates, so they meet that graduation objective. And options actually for one and 2s, because they earned a certificate for 2-year, will also help meet that graduation objective for 2-year institutions. But in assessing the transfer part of it, we're looking at, okay, they earned either an associate's in number 11, and they earned either a certificate, but the value options for 11 and 12 also indicate that they transferred from a 2-year to a 4-year, allowing a 2-year institution to earn those, and meeting the objective on the degree and the transfer objectives. So, a little bit confusing there, right? Because we're looking at different options. So we need to ensure that we're looking at what's happened to them, by the fall, because some of those students could have either graduated in the fall, the spring, or again in the summer, and looking at what happened to those individuals with respect to transfer, especially if you're at a 2-year institution. The next few fields of data, field 32 allows us to respond to when was the date that the degree was earned. If I indicated in that degree CD field number 31 that they earned a credential, what was the date? And then in field 33, I need to respond to what was the area of study, what was their degree, and use these particular responses. You'll notice that in this degree field earned, we have this option value number 16, and this is an area where lots of folks make a lot of errors, because they'll indicate that no degree, or they'll indicate that a degree was earned and provide the degree date, but then they'll leave option number 16. So that's a common error. Another error that sometimes will happen is that individuals will have not earned a degree and they'll choose one of these other options thinking they're reporting on that's the major the student's working on. Okay, so remember, field number 33 is asking specifically which field of study or that the degree was earned in. Okay. Field number 34 is a critical field. It's a critical field because the department, again, is using this particular field to address persistence. They want to know what happened to that student now in the fall of 25. Is that student continuing to be enrolled? So if I have a student that I'm saying was served, they're new, continuing, or summer, what's happened now in the fall of 25? Are they continuing to be enrolled, or did they earn a credential? And so you'll notice that we have varying options, again, that allow us to respond to whether we're a 2-year or whether we're a 4-year institution, to say, the either one, continuing to be enrolled, or two, they've graduated from the institution and transferred. So that's optimal, right, for a 2-year program, that they've earned the certificate or an associate's and transferred. That will meet the degree, the graduation and the transfer objective. Option number 3, they transferred without receiving an associate's degree. Well, that counts favorably for a 2-year institution, because even though they didn't attain a credential, they didn't earn, a certificate or an associate, they did transfer. And so they are still persisting. Option number 4 is they've graduated with an associate's but did not transfer. Well, that still helps meet the graduation objective. Doesn't help us meet that second part for a 4-year institution, right? And then option number 5 is favorable for a 4-year institution, to say that they've earned a bachelor's or an equivalent. What's important, though, as you begin looking at this particular response, and you're thinking about when those credentials were earned, is that they have to have graduated, within the reporting period. And again, most specifically, when you're reporting that degree CD field, that you're looking at, did they immediately transfer by the fall term? Okay, so if they didn't enroll by the fall term, then for your 2-year institutions, then you're not going to meet this particular transfer objective, and you will generate an error. So you need to be careful with your response here for degree CD and your current persist status outcome. Okay. The last 2 fields of data, actually the last 2 fields of data are with respect to financial aid. So here they're asking the question for your participants that were served, and including any students that are prior year participants that were still at the institution, even though you may not have served them, but the fact that they're continuing to be enrolled at your institution in 24-25, how much financial aid money was received. And you'll most likely want to work with your financial aid office to get that information. And then the field number 36, if the student received any grant aid, then how much money was the student given in grant aid? I think we've highlighted the amount here, but please watch for the update, to look at the maximum amounts that you can put in there. I think the amount stayed constant at $73.95, but once the instructions come out, please take a look at that to ensure that. The very last field is part name change. I mentioned that when you provide the student's first name and last name and their date of birth, that those are critical fields and that you cannot change the participant's name. However, in this field, field number 37 is where you have an opportunity to say, this is the name the student is also being tracked. This is their new legal, name change. And so that's the only place where you can provide that. It's important for you not to include any social security numbers. We don't provide those anymore for any of our participants. And you can see that there's some examples here for some of those fields. Okay, so those are all of the 37, 38 fields that we're going to respond to in this APR. Early on, we described, some things, that we want to practice, right? Getting out there to the APR website once it goes live, and then being ready. Most of this information that we have is now readily available for us to go ahead and prepare for the APR submission. We're anticipating again that there are no changes in the APR, and hopefully we can get this all done and be ready, have a nice holiday breaks and sometime before the APR website goes live. Okay, so Lisa, I know you've been, and I've not been monitoring the questions, so I appreciate your addressing any questions, but we have, I think, a couple of minutes if there's any questions.
Yes, there is. Let me read you this, or if you can read it yourself. Sometimes I need to read it myself, right? It's
Mhm.
we sometimes have students who didn't submit a graduation application or had a fee on their account that prevented them from graduating during one academic year. For example,
Mhm.
they were supposed to graduate summer of 2024. And
Yes.
so they didn't actually graduate until the following academic year, which falls into 24-25. Can we
Mhm.
claim these degrees even if the student didn't earn credits in 24-25?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And the unfortunate part is what we have to report on here is, what's been confirmed. Um, if, I mean, if your institution, and I would work, with your registrar's office to say, will that degree, I mean, if you can get something, especially from your registrar's office to say that once the student, clears up, any financial, hold that is being, then this is going to be the date that you have something that you're not putting it on there just because you're putting it on there. Because if you don't, I mean, it's going to impact the outcome of the objective, right? Especially if that's a student at a 4-year institution and it's the 6th year. And if you submit that, because you don't have any information, I would tend, I want the documentation that supports it before I report it on the APR in the event that you're ever audited, to say, why did you report that? And so that's why I'm saying the registrar's office saying that, if they clear that up, this will be what's reported. But the other part of it is that when will that be cleared up? Some students, might owe the institution money for a couple years. And so that's the hard part of it. I mean, here, remember, we said we're certifying to the best of our knowledge, the information is correct. And it's readily verifiable, meaning that I have something that is in my records to say, that's why I reported they graduated on this date. So I hear
Yeah,
you though.
I agree,
It's hard.
Lourdes. I agree.
Mhm.
How about this? If we have a student who is first generation, low income, and disabled,
Mhm.
do we mark them as a number 1 in 15A?
Mhm.
Okay, whatever that code is, I haven't memorized them like you have in field
Mhm.
15. So they're all
Mhm.
3.
Mhm.
And then do we say yes in 15B, or do we
Mhm.
only update 15B in regards to 4 and 5 and 15A? So it's about
Yeah,
15A and B.
I hear you. It's a great question because remember, we're trying to be in compliance, right? I need to meet that 2/3 compliant. And so I have to figure out which is the best place to put them. And so it might be a unique situation for each of you to look at, where am I? Because if I already have sufficient numbers to say I'm going to meet that 2/3, but I'm not meeting that 1/3 criteria, the disabled and low income, then I may be shooting myself in the foot, right? Because I'm not in compliance. I have to meet the 2/3 and the 1/3 criteria. Now, in the report, the standardized objective report that you get from the APR website, it will tell you the number, right? 2/3 and then the 1/3. Um, we earn prior experience points on just meeting the 2/3 criteria, but technically your program specialist can go back and take a look at that and say, well, wait a minute, you're not in compliance with meeting the 2/3 and the 1/3. And when you're not in compliance, then that puts you in a situation where the department can come back and say, you weren't in compliance, so now you owe us money back. Um, because you have to meet that. So I think you're going to individually have to look at that data and say, where do I best report that student?
Unless you're a disability SSS, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, great
Yes.
questions. We have another one about how, and how age-old question, right? How come Hispanic race has to have another ethnicity listed?
And yeah, so technically, I mentioned that the web tool will tell you there's an error. But even at the end of the day, even though it's giving you a message, because you'll see, okay, when you're submitting
Can you
you
scroll
got
up
to
to that?
Excel file twice.
Do you mind scrolling up to that
Yeah.
question?
So So technically, you know, you're submitting your Excel file twice, okay? The first time it's being accepted for is everybody on that Excel file that you downloaded on the file, and do the case numbers match, student cohort match, okay? If there's any error there, you can't proceed with the APR submission. You have to fix those case numbers and the student cohort information before you can continue, okay? If it clears that first hurdle, then you'll move to the second review where you'll see a listing of your participants, and you'll see like, here's this student name and there's an error with the race and ethnicity, okay? You'll see the messages. It'll say something like, if the student is new and you've indicated Hispanic, then one of the other fields has to be a 1. They want you to say essentially race white is 1, right? That's what essentially what the tool is wanting you to do. But I mean, if you can go back in and fix that, because you're not going to get rid of that error until you go back and say that student is Hispanic white. Okay. But you can, at the end of the day, you could say, just submit my APR. So you can continue moving forward with the submission, knowing that even though you have that error message, okay? So, you can get around it. It's just that if you just have to get used to seeing those error messages on that list, okay?
And the other one we have here is regarding field 21.
Mhm.
What do we do if we have students from from cohort 17, 18?
Okay.
Oh, that's,
Um,
ooh,
Yeah,
that's
you won't,
old.
yeah, you won't. So, and that's one of the things that I was mentioning. Sometimes the tool will say you have to keep reporting on that person. If they're on the download file, you have to keep reporting on them. In those cases, I just report the old data because they're not even being evaluated for any purpose. They don't, that cohort's been evaluated. If, you know, they're gonna get rid of those records that you're no longer supposed to report on. But there's something for some reason in the tool that's causing that record to stay. And you can't get around, you know, the APR submission until you leave them in there. So.
Well, Lourdes, what if you're still serving them? Some people are still
Oh,
serving
so
these
if you
students.
have somebody, that one might be somebody who is an out of range cohort, okay?
They're a
Is there?
99, but you still serve them.
Well, no, well, is there an out of range cohort because you didn't, if you serve them? Yeah, I mean, yeah, if they were from a long time ago and you're continuing to serve them, they're staying in that student cohort year is 99, but you're
Right.
still serving them. They're counting in your objectives for your numbers served. You're just never going to be able to get credit for them for degree attainment.
Right. They count toward your numbers. They count toward your
Yes.
eligibility percentage. They count toward persistence
Mm.
because they won't leave. If anything, they
Yeah.
count toward good
Yeah.
standing. They're in good standing, but they
Uh,
won't count for the last objective. And some people are, let's be for real, are desperate for the numbers. And if you can,
Oh,
they're
yeah.
receiving services. Somebody did ask, well, how long, you know, and since they've stayed active, they continue to be active. Somebody asked, well, what if how long does a student have to be gone before they can be new again?
Well, they have to be in the last grant cycle. So like,
Correct.
so right now, if they were recent, so they were recently served in this, within this last year, right? 2015. But if they were served prior to 2015, this last grant cycle, then those are those individuals that would start as new. You bring them back 24, 25, and you say, okay, they're a new participant in 24, 25 as the new 24, 25 cohort. Okay, because they've been gone that long. Okay, they're starting over essentially, and they have either the 4 years or they have the 6 years, depending on the type of institution, to earn their degree.
Okay. And so something old can be new again eventually, but
Yes.
there's been a gap. There had
yeah.
to been a breakup
Yeah.
of a certain amount of time. It's not that, oh, I've been serving this student from cohort 17, 18. I'm gonna I'm next year they're gonna be new. No, you can't be 99 and turn new right away. You've got to
No, they
be on
can't.
for a minute,
No.
for more than a minute, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, and that's a great question too, because this is within the instructions. Okay, so even if you go out and look in the instructions, I don't have the page number now, but they define, who's the out of range cohort. And they'll talk about those grant cycles. So when the instructions come out, please read that carefully. What's the grant cycle that they are considering before I can make somebody a new participant again? Okay.
I'm going to take a couple more if you've got time, Lourdes. Is that okay? You good for
Mhm.
time? Our
Yes.
institution has several summer sessions, but does not report graduation dates until after the final session, which is usually after September 1st. Can we
Mhm.
still count these students as summer graduates, even though the date may fall into the next academic year? We
Mhm.
will not show them as being active or served in the next academic year. So
Mhm.
to that previous question, it's like, well, but these students, they did
Yeah.
graduate, but the date, if you were to be for real,
Mhm.
that date would throw us off, wouldn't it?
It would, because remember that story, right? They're looking for who graduated by the end of August 31st of 2025, when the reporting period ended. And so you may have to put August 31st there with September
Yeah.
2nd. To
You may
say,
do that in a
yeah,
beg for, I mean, not forgiveness, but have your
but yeah,
explanation ready,
have
right?
your documentation why you did that. So.
Yeah,
But
to do
yeah,
that.
because they're looking at particular time periods when, degrees were earned within the reporting period.
Can you cover it? Someone didn't ask this, but it's in the first page of the instructions as to what your reporting period is versus your budget. They're two different
Yes, two
timings.
different
And
things.
so
Mhm.
y'all
Yeah.
need to be aware that your first day that counts toward the APR is the first day of your fall classes,
Mhm.
fall of 2025. That would have, the
Yeah.
day was the day, first day of fall classes is the first
Mhm.
day of your APR for 25, 26. That's why they ask. One of the
Mhm.
first questions I think you covered
Yeah.
when they say, hey, when was your first day of classes for fall 2024? Because
Yeah.
that's what they're going to
Mhm.
hold you to. So that
Yeah.
was, I was so many years old till I
Mhm.
realized that, Lourdes,
Yeah. Yeah.
doesn't go by September 1st.
Yeah, yeah, and they don't. So keep in mind that the APR is really more aligned to the academic year, right? And your budget period is tied to that September 1 through August, to August 31st. The academic year, and that's why when I was going through the presentation, I was saying, think about that as being the fall of 24 and now the fall of 25, because we're trying to assess what happened to those individuals with respect to this academic time period.
Here's another one. I often second guess myself for returnees at a 2-year college. If a student stops out for a year, but they're within their 4 years of being served, I will make them active again and continuing. But if a student stopped out for 3 or more years, can we bring them back as new participant if they're past the 4 years of reporting? And I believe you have to actually wait till the cohort, till the grant cycle ends.
Yes, that's
They
correct.
come
You
back
have
as
to wait
continue.
till, yeah. Now that's a great question, Lauren, too, because, we'll have students who stop out, for example. And so in those particular cases, I may have in 23, 20, let's do 22. Let's do 22, 23. They were a participant and I said they left the institution. Their current persist status was that they're no longer at the institution. And so I reported them, it wasn't a successful persistence, right? Because they didn't stay. But now in 24, 25, they've come back. I still leave them within the same cohort when they were first served. Because technically they have, if I'm at a 2-year institution, I have 4 years for them to graduate. Because again, I've been picking up students at varying grade levels. And so I'm going to continue in 24, 25 to say that's a continuing student. Remember, I'm grouping returning students and continuing students together. So that's why they're in that continuing group. But now I'm just going to continue to report on them there and hopefully they'll graduate or continue to be enrolled. I don't change their cohort year. I just simply change that they're a continuing student. And because in 22, 23, they were a continuing student. In 23, 24, they were probably a prior year participant. And now in 24, 25, they're a continuing participant. I need to ensure that I have removed, the last served date And I need to ensure I remove the reason because now they're back in the program.
Okay.
Okay.
I think you covered this with this 2/3 need to be low income, first generation, disabled, or low income, first generation, and disabled and low income. I know
Yeah.
that 1/3 of disabled have to be low income, and I
Yes, yes. Yeah, so 2/3 of our participants have to be first generation low income and or disabled. And or disabled. Okay, so it's probably a good way to say it. 2/3 have to be first generation low income and or disabled. Okay. And then
Okay.
the 1/3 of the individuals who are disabled have to be low income. Okay.
so that would be yes to the first part, right? Does 2/3 have to be
Yes.
first generation?
Mhm.
Really? And then okay, yes. So that would be yes. Yes. Okay. Cool. Okay. If you met with a student on May 3rd and assisted them with getting courses for fall 2025, but they completed their official trio intake in June 3rd, would you count the first date of service as June 3rd or May 4th? I know what I would do, but I'm going to ask you, Lourdes, because you know I avoid classification.
I would most likely choose the June 3rd because that's when I have official documentation to support that they're an eligible participant. And so I need the documentation, remember, to be able to count them. To show I have the signatures. I have, hopefully all of the information that I've made my decision on, demonstrated academic need, application to establish, first generation and low income. So
So then they would be
yeah.
a new summer student.
Yeah.
If you could have gotten it all together in May and gotten all their stuff and provided a service, and they could have prepped in as a regular new student at the very end of that semester. Once you cross June 1st, you have no choice. If you use that as your date of first service to be a new summer student, that counts toward the numbers for this year, but their cohort is the next year.
Yeah, well, and that's a great question. So it's a student. Let's say you have a student, they're at your grantee institution. And they've been there, let's say they were there in the spring. Maybe they started in the spring of 25. So if that student was there in the spring, but you started serving them as new summer, I picked them up on June 3rd, for example, using that date, okay? Because that student has already been at the institution, I'm picking them up. They're still going to be identified as a new student in the 24-25 cohort. The only students that I can identify and putting them in the 25-26 cohort, again, are those students that are going to be new to the institution in the fall of 25 and 26. Those summer that I code as 8 or a 9, okay? So whether they're taking classes or not, those students coded as part CD equals 8 or part CD equals 9 will get a cohort of 25-26. Because they remember their first academic year of college is going to be in the 25-26 reporting period. Okay, and I need to give them the full advantage of either having the 4 years or the 6 years to earn the degree. Okay.
All right. I think we had another question similar to the degree has been awarded once requirements met, but there's a hold. Like I'm just going to say, I would document the date that they should have received their degree, but then have ready your documentation and your explanation. And again, remember, nobody has 100% graduation or persistence rate. So it depends. If I already met the objective, Lourdes, with everybody else, I mean, you know what I'm saying? If I've exceeded or met am I going
I wouldn't risk it.
Yes, exactly. I wouldn't risk it. So it's one of those things that is unfortunate. But if I've got the numbers already, I might not work so hard or stick my neck out there and put a date that I'm that won't be able to initially or ever be
Mhm.
matched to what is on the record.
Yeah. Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
I hear you though. I know, and too many of our students are in that situation.
But
You know.
so hopefully not, like I said, you know, I would put a placeholder on them, see if you can
Mhm.
meet your objective, and then just go. If you don't know the answer or you can't prove it, it's better to go ahead and say no or a negative,
Mhm.
especially if it's not going to impact you achieving your objective. Okay.
Yeah.
And let's end it with, go ahead,
The
Lourdes.
last one. Okay. Yeah, I'm a
Yeah,
new
last one.
director. I'm a new director. I joined the program in September. The program didn't have a staff for a couple of months. And you weren't able to hold a summer bridge program. So how will that impact you? Well, the way it might impact you, it really comes down to the numbers thing, right? Oftentimes we use our summer bridge program to help us with our summer recruitment. So if we didn't get the number funded to serve in the fall or in the spring, then we might use the summer to be able to reach our numbers. If you weren't able to hold that summer program, then we may not have reached your numbers. Um, at, so what happens when you don't reach your numbers? Well, 24, 25 is the last year of the last grant cycle. So oftentimes, the program officers look at your annual performance report and whether you met and you made substantial progress to determine whether they're going to give you the money for the next program year. Well, 24, 25 is the last year of the last grant cycle. So it's not like they're going to now give you the number. They've already given you the money for 25, 26. So if you didn't reach your numbers, you didn't reach your numbers. It's not going to impact you really because the grant cycle is ended. However, the program specialist can still come back and have a conversation with you. Oh, I noticed in 24, 25, you didn't reach your numbers. And I would keep that documentation that you have regarding that I wasn't able to hold a summer program because of whatever was happening with funding, the transition from staff, not knowing whether there was going to be a program. And so because of those are great reasons why many of us, right, we were really upset with SSS and not knowing early enough because of impacts like this. And so you need that documentation to support that. I didn't reach my numbers because of this and how that impacted. But I would focus more so on that. I didn't, because the program specialist might say, I noticed you didn't reach your numbers in 24, 25. If you made substantial progress, they may not even have had the question because you made substantial progress. But if you were below substantial progress or 85%, then they might come back and say, they might come back and so I have to tell you all this because this is just really warming. My granddaughter just got here and my great grandson is tapping me on trying to get my attention. And
You
so
want me to let you go?
I don't know, it's so funny because he's like tapping me. And so, but anyway, so if you didn't reach your numbers, then I would focus on that. These are the reasons I didn't reach my number. However, I have a plan. I have a strategy and we are going to meet the numbers for 25, 26 and focus on those things. Because that's really the only time that they would come back and say, well, this is why we're concerned that you didn't make substantial progress. Okay, so it's important about having the plan and what are you going to do to meet those numbers in 25, 26.
And Lourdes, on that count there with that situation going on, gosh, I just lost my train of thought. But that type of student there, if they don't remain, bottom line, on the APR, when the when you will be asked, a pop-up window will come up if you're not at 100%. And so I don't remember how many characters. So you already want to go ahead and draft and maybe Word or Notepad somewhere your response as to why you didn't meet your numbers. Lourdes, I don't know if I was going to read it. Maybe this time they will. So that you don't spend a lot of time trying to do it online and then get timed out. So they're going to ask you, why did you not meet your numbers? So you need to have an answer ready. Okay.
Yeah. So,
Alrighty.
but yeah, I think that that's, 24, 25 is the last year. I mean, I think the only way that the program specialist would look at it again is if they're concerned. It would really depend on that number, and they're concerned because you did not make substantial progress.
Mhm.
And more concerned with, you've got money now in 25, 26. What's your plan? And focus on the good stuff, what you're doing now. Okay.
Lourdes, I think you did it. I mean, we went a little over. Thank you so much for your extra time, but we answered, there's like 3 we answered live, and most of them we will go ahead and I answered and typed up something, so we'll have that ready. And yeah, I'll answer that, when Rebecca, then you want to state the actual services that were provided, not the event, but the services that were provided. Okay. Anyway, and that's just for everybody. We're focused more what services were provided, not when they happened during orientation, during a picnic, it's what they received at that event, no matter what it was. Anyway, thank you all so much. Thank you, Lourdes, for everything. We'll let you go hang out with the grandkids, and love you, love you, love you. And we will talk later. All right. Thank you all so much.